But it came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth, took great indignation, and mocked the Jews. And he spake before his brethren and the army of Samaria, and said, What do these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? The once mighty Jerusalem lay in ruins. They were really in ruins by their own decisions. They had begun to leave God out of their decisions. And every time they backslid, things went south. They had really made a mess of things. They had left God totally out. They had forsaken the ways of God. And in their weakened spiritual condition, they made very poor physical decisions. They allowed things in their life they never should have allowed. You see, when you open the door and you crack that door, more will come in than you intended. And the outcome was that it left a total destruction on the Jewish people. They were taken captive. The city was burned. The walls were destroyed. Anybody was living in captivity. The poorest were left there living just in pitiful conditions. And the enemy was okay as long as they were in this degraded state. But God planted a seed in the heart of a man. You see, sometimes you'll have these thoughts in your mind about doing godly things, about doing things that would lead you in a godly direction and would have godly outcomes. And sometimes in yourself you feel helpless. You feel like it's too big. How in the world can I ever do that? I don't understand how I could bring this all together. And it seems like an insurmountable feat. And yet, there was a man. The people in Jerusalem probably thought that he had totally forgot about them. He was living in the palace of the enemy. He was living high on the hog. He found himself being a cupbearer to the king. He found himself serving in the palace. Here he is in the palace, and God is planting a seed in his heart to do something. How can a city defend itself? Especially in those days, defense was really very important by how your walls were. Without walls, you were pretty much defenseless. The enemy could sneak in the night and could have his way, his free will. And that's how the devil loves to have us, where we are in a defenseless place. We are in a place where we feel like we can't even help ourselves. And that's how the people in Jerusalem felt. I'm sure the thought crossed his mind, here I am, not even living there. What can I do? I'm not wealthy. I do happen to be living well because of who I serve, but I'm helpless. I'm still basically a slave. I don't call my own shots. The gates have been burned. The city's been trampled. What was once a place of great dominance is now desolate. It's rubble. And for 70 years it lay in ruins. It just lay there. Nothing positive seeming to happen. And here, old Nehemiah, you see, he had a call on his life, but he finds himself living in a foreign land. Anybody know we're strangers and pilgrims in this land? He finds himself serving an ungodly king in an ungodly place. And here God's placing godly things in his heart. He's planting a seed in the heart of a man who seems to be a long way away. But God's also softening the heart. He's softening the heart of this foreign king, the king of Persia, King Cyrus. He had allowed some Jews to return. About 50,000 of them, as far as we can tell, had. And they began to build this temple, and they had done different things. They had done what they could to clear the rubble. They had laid again foundations of the temple, but their work was contested by the Samaritans. And before long, the zeal faded away, and they didn't move forward. They got the foundations laid, but the temple was still not built. It stayed that way for another 15 years, and it was 15 years before the prophets Haggai and Zechariah came upon the scene. They began to preach and to challenge people. Never underestimate the power of standing on the Word of God and challenging people. And so finally, under their leadership, the temple was rebuilt. But with the completion of that project, the zeal of the people, it began to fade again. And their fire began to fade. Anybody know what's that like? You start out and you have that fire, and then all of a sudden life shows up and the fire kind of dwindles and life begins to happen. And on Sunday you can feel like shouting, and on Monday you feel like cashing it all in. I don't know, maybe they took a break, maybe they just took a breather, and then one day turned into another. I'm sure they told themselves when a convenient season came, they would, continue on their work to restore Jerusalem to its former glory. But one day turned into another, and weeks turned into months, and months turned into years, and years turned into decades. And as slowly as they became comfortable in their own life, they became comfortable with living around ruins and living around broken walls and living around destruction. It just became a familiar place to them, and it didn't seem to bother them anymore. And you see, as long as they basically were in ruins, the enemies around them basically left them alone. That's why that when you are out there living like the devil, it seems like the devil don't bother you. Well, why would he? You're on his side. You're not doing anything to impact his kingdom. And that's why when you rise up and you begin to find out the ways of God, you begin to make stands in your life, that's then that you feel the battle. And if you'll hang with it, victory will come. But you're going to have to get some tenacity and break through that little bit of what's coming against you in resistance, because you see the devil's happy as long as your life is in ruins and the devil's having his way in your life. Why would he fight you when you're on his side? Why would he fight you when you're not doing anything to impact his kingdom? But when you make an impact, sometimes you got to get a little fight in you. I want to tell somebody today, it's all right to get some fight in you. Matter of fact, you need a little fight in you. You need some resistance to the will of the enemy. They knew they needed walls. They knew they needed to establish a separation between them and what their enemy wanted to assert dominion over them. They knew that. I want to say something today. When you begin to put walls up between you and the enemy, there is things that the devil gets mad. He don't give up easy. He don't like to lose what he had possession of. And when you begin to build walls of separation, and you say, you know what, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not talking like that anymore. I'm not going there anymore. I'm not going to partake of that anymore. When you lay down the rules and you get back in control of your life, that's when the enemy likes to try to kick you a minute, because he don't like losing. But I'm here to tell somebody today, the devil is losing today. He don't like it. He's losing today. He knows that God has been planting a seed in your heart to build some walls. And when you build those walls, he don't like it, because he knows that he's losing dominion in your life. He don't like it when he realizes I'm not controlling their decisions. They've made up their mind that as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. As for me and my house, I will serve him, and I'll serve him with gladness. So the enemy's not real happy about it. He's not liking it. But they started with the temple. Because I'm going to tell you something. There's something that happens when you start things in this house. You ever notice you live like you want, and you can stay that way a long time, but you start going to the house of the Lord, and God begins to plant different things in your heart. There's new seeds that's planted in your heart. There's new things that's planted in your heart. And when those new seeds are planted, the devil gets nervous because you're serving him. Notice, dude, you're not in control. You see, the enemy doesn't like it when he's not controlling your home. He don't like it when he's not controlling your mind. He don't like it when he's not controlling your direction. And so those new desires begin to wrestle with those old desires, those new passions begin to outgrow old passions. And he realizes that his dominion and authority, those days have become numbered because there's a new seed. There's a new plant that's growing. There's something that's rising up. And God's working on a lot of ends when he does that. See, the devil's okay with a little religion, but when you start putting down barriers and you start saying, I don't act like that anymore, you make him nervous. You see, walls are so important. Worship without walls is powerless. Worship without walls is like just eating the appetizer but never getting anything that gives you real meat and real strength and begins to build you. And so ultimately worship without walls ends up leaving you hopeless, and it leaves you in a place where you're tantalized by two worlds. You feel God when you're at church, but yet somebody else is control when you're out of church. And things just begin to go that way. And so you begin to feel the struggle with the bondage. You begin to feel the struggle with the addictions. You begin to feel the struggle with things in your life, and you feel this call that's coming from the heavenly when you're in the house of God. And now it begins to torment you. And because you know you've been touched by the heavens, you know that you've heard from God, and then you walk out that door and you begin to flirt with the enemy. And when you flirt with the enemy, you've got to be careful, because if you give the devil an inch, he'll take a mile. And I'm telling somebody something today. God is dealing with you. He's dealing with you to lay the law down, because God is calling you to a higher place. Another 56 years that passed. Years of heartache, years of sorrow, years of bondage, years of defeat. Years where there were more bad days than good days. And the enemy kept robbing, and he kept coming in. He kept doing things to antagonize them and to remind them of their situation. You see, the devil loves to rub your nose in your situation. He loves that. But all of a sudden, when you get to Nehemiah 1:3-4, and it says, and they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. And it came to pass, when I heard these words, that I sat down and wept and mourned certain days, and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. And then when you get to chapter 2, and you start with verse 1, and it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes, the king, that wine was before him. And I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. Now I had not been before time sad in his presence. Wherefore the king said unto me, why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very sore afraid, and said unto the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad, when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? He found himself in what he thought was helpless. But God had placed him right where he needed to be, for he was the cupbearer of the King. Let me tell you something today. You are thinking, how can I do a godly thing and I have to face week after week what I have to face? How can I do what God's calling me to do when I live and have to deal with things that I have to deal with? But let me tell you something. God has been planting a seed in your heart, and it might look like a seed today, but it's germinating and it's going to become a tree. If you'll keep feeding it in the house of the Lord, if you'll keep listening to that voice, if you'll keep hearing the voice and the call of God, He's placed you in a place to do things that other people can't do. And when the king took notice, God was working on the heart of that king already. And he gave him power to go back. And God made the enemy provide the money and the things to rebuild. He gave him writ that would cause him to go in there with power and authority. And the cupbearer went with the king's call on him. Oh, he had a greater call from a greater king than they could see. But he had the king at that time who had the power. He went with the papers to get everything he needed. He went to this man and this tribe. He said, you build the walls that's in front of your house. He went to this one. He said, this tribe, you build the walls that's in front of your house. He went to this one. And there was a man by the name of Sanballat. And there was another by the name of Tobias. And they hated it. And they began to make fun. They began to say, what do you think you're doing up there? What do you think you're doing? I read some of it in the opening. And they began to taunt him. They began to say, you think you're going to start even sacrificing again? Oh, I hope something that was in their heart that said, you bet I do. You bet I do. Hallelujah! Because walls are going up. And it got to the point where he had to come along. He said, listen, you put a brick in one hand and a trumpet in the other. You see the enemy come and blow the trumpet, but don't quit building the wall. And the next thing they knew, the wall was coming up, and the wall kept coming up till the wall was built in 2 weeks' time. I'm telling somebody today, with God on your side, you can do the impossible. But it served notice to the devil. I want to say it one more time. It served notice to the enemy. The enemy didn't like it. It all came from a seed that was planted in the heart. A seed by a man who was not even living in the kingdom, but he was the cupbearer to the king. Seeds in unlikely places. Some of you are saying, Pastor, you don't know where I've come from. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know how I live. You don't know this. You don't know how that. So you're saying God can't do anything? You're saying you're not feeling the call of God to come up higher? Why would God give you that feeling in your spirit? Why would that seed be planted if God didn't have a purpose? I want to say it again. You cannot underestimate a seed that's planted in a heart. You cannot underestimate a seed that gets planted in the heart of a man, in the heart of a woman, in the heart of someone, and God's talking to them, and the enemy's trying to torment them, saying, it's not worth it, you'll never do anything, you can't do anything in your position. You hear me today, the devil is a liar. If you'll let go and let God and follow that seed that God's planted in your heart, there's no telling where it'll take you. There's no telling what God will do with you. But you've got to put it in the hands of God. You've got to let God lead the way. You've got to get something in your heart that said, I want Him more than anything. Quit worrying about all the why nots, why you can't, and turn that around and use that a little different way. And say, why not? Why not me? Why not here? And why not now? Do you think God would plant that in your heart if there wasn't hope? Someone came to me some years back. They laid out some very worthy causes and said, Pastor, do you think that that's just me, or that's the enemy, or what do you think that is? And I just stopped and I looked at them and said, do you think the devil would plant that in your heart? To do that kind of righteousness? To do that kind of good? To be that kind of help in the house of the Lord? Do you think the devil would plant that in your heart? And they just stopped and said, I never looked at it that way. Yeah, I'm saying, why not? Why not believe that God would use you? Why not believe that God would anoint you and anoint your home and anoint the right things? Why not believe that God has a purpose for you today? Why not believe that God's calling you to be in the army of the Lord? Why not? Why not here? Why not now? Why not? In Nehemiah 2 and 17, then said I unto them, ye see the distress that we are in. How Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come, let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. Then I told them of the hand of my God. I love that. Would you read that with me? Would you look over my head a minute? Then I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me, as also the king's words that he had spoken unto me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian, heard it, they laughed us to scorn and despised us, and said, what is this thing that ye do? Will ye rebel against the king? Then answered I them and said unto them, the God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore we his servants will arise and build. But ye have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. He served notice. God's calling somebody in this house today to serve the devil notice. God called me. God whispered in my ear. God planted a seed in my heart, and God's going to see it through. What is God planting in your heart? What is God planting in your heart? What has he been talking to you about? What's he been dealing with you about? You've been saying, I don't know if I can. I'm not sure where to start. I don't even know how to. Oh! It's a seed that God put there. It's a seed of the heart. Let it grow.